Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be a short presentation because it could get long and technical. And however, it's going to be a short presentation. Currently, I've been entrusted to rebuild the race motor for John Mearns' Decker, which is a little BMC motor.
You trying to beat me?
And in the process, we were looking at the camshaft. In fact, John was at my house. We were looking at the camshaft, and it reminded me a week or two ago of, camshafts and technicalities, and they're so complex. Some of you are technical and understand it. Some of you are non-technical. It's a mind-boggling art, the art of camshafts. So why is it a mind-boggling art? Well, because they control how the air and the fuel gets in the motor and when and how and so forth. And we've got to remember that when you're putting air and fuel into a motor, it's not just a simple down the hole and then it goes, because what happens in a process called pulse tuning, the fuel and air comes rushing down and then the valve closes. The fuel and air bounces back out and tries to come back out again. But it hits 14.69 psi atmosphere and goes, hold on. So you've got this pulsing action. Now, the same thing happens with the exhaust stroke. You've got a pulsing action. The pulse of exhaust goes out and helps drag the next one through and so forth. It's quite a complicated thing. And the best way to describe it quickly is imagine a whole bunch of people in a corridor and you leave the back door open. The front door you open up and you let a whole lot of people out, but then you slam the door shut and all the people bounce and they try and fall back the other way. That's the same sort of thing as pulse tuning. There was a man who thought about this in the very early days, and his name was Iskenderian, and he was from Los Angeles, and a very clever man who understood geometry, fuel, pulse tuning, blah, blah, blah. And he was a deep thinking guy. So he bought a truck chassis and he made probably not but one of the most famous first hot rods in America in the late 30s. And he was a thinking guy. He put a flathead V8 on it, but they made an overhead valve conversion, which was even before Arden heads and all that stuff in the early 50s. Very, very smart, clever guy, smoking a cigar. And there he is with a cigar back in the probably the 40s by this stage. And that's the car he built.
It's a good looking machine.
It's a good looking machine, considering it was built in 38, 39. He then started to mess around with camshafts, and he thought to himself, he had a friend called Ed Winfield who was a V8 expert, and Ed and him talked a lot together, and Ed finally ended up playing around with camshafts, and he realized he could change the shape and the time of a camshaft to suit the track or the event for the car which it's built for. So in other words, a speedway car needs fairly high revving, constant revs, whereas a drag car, slightly different, and a NASCAR on the bank tracks, they all have different engine rev requirements. And he was able to learn through a long process of how to design camshaft. This is a single cylinder camshaft testing machine, but you notice there's a strobe light. And he was one of the first guys to look at the action of valves and springs and cams using a strobe light. So he could freeze the action. He could literally freeze the action and watch the distortion of the springs or whatever. In 1946, he started his own company because a lot of people were saying, hey, this guy's smart. He started his own company. He went out and bought an ordinary grinder, not a camshaft grinder, just an ordinary grinder that grinds round shafts. But he modified it so the whole bed of the machine would rock. And then he made a template. So you can imagine a cam lobe, but that big. And it ran on a roller. So it would tilt the whole bed back and forth, which allowed the grinding wheel to grind a blank in the same shape. So that's one of the things he perfected. Very clever guy. Later years, he became known as, Mr. Cam, Mr. Motor, Mr. Everything. He's a very intelligent guy. Rollers, cam followers are important because they reduce the amount of friction. And every roller, of course, has to be straight. It can't roll sideways or skid sideways. He was one of the first guys to make up a device to keep those rollers in a straight line on the cam. Very simple but clever. That's him in later years, in the probably 60s or late 50s. And it looks like my desk. And that's a later shot, even more amazing. I just find that quite amazing. Just blow it up a bit, yeah. So then they started doing promotions around America. He was promoting his product and his ideas and his brains at race meetings, drag meetings, hill climbs, speedway, stock car racing, beach racing, you name it. And they had various logos that were set up to advertise. The most famous one is the one that's currently used, is this. I went there in 1995. I went to LA and I went to a few places, Cunningham Rods and a few other places, but I also went to his workshop, and it's about 15 minutes from the airport. And I had a hell of a difficulty finding it because American street numbering still confuses me, and I've never worked it out. And I was driving back and forth. Finally, I stopped and they said, just over there. So that's the building. That's the Iskenderian factory. And that's not my photo, but that's the exact look he gave me when I walked in. Where are you from? I said, well, actually, I'm from Australia. Oh, okay. But I said, I'm actually a Kiwi. A Kiwi? You know Bert? You know Bert Monroe? Hey, what's your name? I said, Dave. And he's got this little cigar. He's about this big. Got this little cigar. He said, hey, Dave, come in my office. So I went into his office. Sorry, I jumped a page there. So he took me out and showed me the workshop. There was like 50 camshaft grinders, machines with 50 guys all working away. He took me out into this area. Now, this area has this, and this is called a spintron. And this spintron, basically, very simply, a dirty, great, big electric motor driving a dummy, empty motor. No pistons, no conrods, no nothing. But it did have the timing chain here, and it was driving the camshafts and the valves and the springs. It's all it was doing. So they'd switch this thing on, and the noise, the unbelievable noise. They got it up to about 8,000 or 9,000 RPM and just left it there for a minute, screaming. And I said, what's your process? He said, well, for example, Michigan International Speedway, we've downloaded the data from the V8, the NASCAR, and it looks like that. And if you have a look up here, that's the acceleration and pedal. That's the speed, of one lap of Michigan Speedway. So they can reproduce each speedway or each track into the spintron machine to imitate an hour's race or whatever. And what they were testing was springs. Now, normal valve springs, are just round and no. They were experimenting with a thing called beehive springs. The springs are actually shaped like that. And if you look here, they're smaller on the top than they are down the bottom. So they're sort of like that. And it gets rid of a lot of the strange oscillation. It's a big word like marmalade. Now here is a video of what happens to valve springs at high revs. And this has been done with a strobe light, so you can see it. Now, it's not easy to see, but if you look at the top, there, you'll start to see a little mark, and you'll see this part here will start to, there it is, starting to rotate. See it moving?
Yep.
And when I first started racing, I couldn't understand why all the bottom of the head was shiny, because the spring was turning. The spring was turning. So that was a fascinating thing. The other thing that gets me is that the valve itself is waltzing around. You look at the top of the valve. Yeah. Look at that. Quite amazing. So that's his desk when I visited. Come into my office, Dave. That was his desk. It's just beyond belief, really. That's it. Now, he was a collector of machinery, but he's been collecting it since the mid-1940s. And that's that's not my photo. That's one photo of his backyard. It's probably 10 acres. Or no, about 5 acres. Chock-a-block of machinery. Now, this is him when I was there. That's my photo, and you can still see at the back. I'll just blow that up a wee bit there. You see at the back there, it goes right up the back. All of this is old milling machines, grinders, drills, you name it, whatever.
Is he married?
Pardon?
Is he married?
I don't know I think he is, I don't know. And he pulled back this thing, and there's the original hot rod from 1939, which I thought was just fantastic. That car today is now stored in the Museum of American Speed in Nebraska, and it's been rebuilt just beautifully, just beautifully rebuilt. 2 years ago, he was 103 years old. Today, his birthday's in July. Today, right here now, he's 104 years old, still alive. So that's my little story about Iskenderian. Thank you. Yes. That's it. Thank you.
That's a great story. Thank you, Larry.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
My ambition was to make $100 a day, which would be 5 cams at $20 a piece, labor, you know. And by golly, in about a year, we were doing 5 cams a day, and that was a good living. So then it got bigger than expected after that. You had to build your own cam grinder if you wanted to make racing cams. A place for a master cam and a roller to run against. And this will, with the right master cam, you'll get a certain profile on your cams. I can now make cams, make a master, and make many profiles like that on a cam. In those days, it was a matter of taking the stock cam, grinding the lobes to a new profile within the stock cam, and getting more lift and longer duration, better breathing. Well, by golly, a hot rod magazine had started. When I found out about it, I put an ad in there for $10 a month. Believe it or not, that got back east to NASCAR, who was running flathead Fords on racetracks back there. So they called up and wanted 2 cams by airmail at $20 a piece. And I was afraid they were going to ask me how much experience I had, because I only had 6 months experience or so. But they were open-minded. They were buying those cams, and they ordered again and again. And I found out later that the reason they were buying them, because of my fast action and short timing, but a good area under the lift curve because of the fast action. And since they only had the rev about 5,500 RPM, the engine had good mid-range power, and you could pass cars on the track and work your way to the front. I was always afraid some engineer would make fun of me or tell me what I'm talking about is not true. But no, I realized later there weren't any experts about this new hobby. It was open for everybody to throw in their 2 cents worth, you might say. All these people had talent, needed a new hobby, and by God, this was it. I was born in 1921, but my dad moved to Los Angeles in 1921 or 22. When we were 12 years old, that'd be 1933, we'd see in our neighborhood a little stripped down Model T or a Buick. I said, boy, what could be more fun than that, to ride around a little homemade racing car like that? Well, I found out they call them gow jobs. It might have came from get up and go like 60 was a famous phrase in those days. Well, we found out there are a lot of these cars in different parts of town, and if you want to see a lot of them, go up to Muroc Dry Lake several times a year, 100 miles from Los Angeles. out in the desert there, there'd be this dry lake bed, which floods in the winter and smooths out and makes a good racing surface, almost 20 miles long. And they'd have these meets up there. And we also found out that in our neighborhood, lucky there were 2 members of the Bungholders Club, which belonged to SCTA, that was organized with the Throttlers Club and the Cam Breakers and this and that. There was many different clubs. And they would have these meets up at the dry lakes for top speed only, you know. I didn't have the money to join, and I just hung out with them. But you could buy a Model T in those days for $10 and take it home and take it apart or get it running, you know. So we learned as we went along, and the older fellows would give us advice and tell us how to do things, and we learned from them. There was hop-up equipment for the Model T, which was made back east, usually in Indiana or Ohio. And we could buy those cylinder heads at pretty cheap in those days. After building several little junky cars, I built a little better car, and now I had bought a set of cylinder heads that fit this 32 Ford V8 engine, which I was going to put in my Model T, and I'm going to have a special cam because it's half overhead and half flathead. And I knew it would be a different cam for the intake valves than it did for the exhaust. It didn't take long to find out that we have a mentor, Edward A. Winfield, who was a race driver, and he became an expert at grinding cams and the building speed equipment. So I went to Winfield, and luckily I had the money, about $20 to buy a cam now, because I was working in the machine shop and we were building airplane parts for England. England was already in the war. I met Mr. Winfield, and he took me into the shop and showed me the cam grinder he had built. And with my little experience as apprentice machinist, I said, gee, I could build that little cam grinding attachment too. So pretty soon we heard about fellows joining the Army Air Corps and learning how to fly, and that seemed very exciting, and everybody was like to be a fighter pilot. So now all these fellas that used to race at the dry lakes and try out their cars, they usually worked with government equipment and learned a lot more about engines during the war. And when they came back out of the service, they were anxious to go back to the dry lake racing up there several times a year. Gosh, it was a greater new economy, yeah. That's what helped a lot. And that's when I got interested. The cam grinding was considered a very technical and I didn't know they had this phrase, but uncharted territory. This is something new, so I decided to build a cam grinder. You had to build your own cam grinder if you wanted to make racing cams. A place for a master cam and a roller to run against, and this will with the right master cam, you'll get a certain profile on your cams. I can now make cams, make a master, and make many profiles like that on a cam. In those days, it was a matter of taking the stock cam, grinding the lobes to a new profile within the stock cam, and getting more lift and longer duration, better breathing. Well, by golly, a Hot Rod magazine had started. When I found out about it, I put an ad in there for $10 a month. Believe it or not, that got back east to NASCAR, who was running flathead Fords on racetracks back there. So they called up and wanted 2 cams by airmail at $20 a piece. And I was afraid they were going to ask me how much experience I had, because I only had 6 months experience or so. But they were open-minded. They were buying those cams, and they ordered again and again. And I found out later that the reason they were buying them, because of my fast action and short timing, but a good area under the lift curve because of the fast action. And since they only had to rev about 5,500 RPM, the engine had good mid-range power, and you could pass cars on the track and work your way to the front. And you couldn't do that if they bought a super cab, because that was so long in duration, it only had top-end power. So mine had kind of a flexible power. My ambition was to make $100 a day, which would be 5 cams at $20 a piece, labor, you know. And by golly, in about a year, we were doing 5 cams a day. And that was a good living. So then it got bigger than expected after that. I couldn't believe it. All these people had talent, needed a new hobby, and by God, this was it. Either hot rods or drag racing cars. It was booming, and I was lucky I grew along with it. I was always afraid some engineer would make fun of me or tell me what I'm talking about is not true. But no, I realized later there weren't any experts about this new hobby. It was open for everybody to throw in their 2 cents worth, you might say. And then pretty soon I started to boast in my ads, and pretty soon we had a kind of little rivalry, and sometimes we'd poke fun at the other guys. So pretty soon they called it the Cam Wars between cam grinders. So 1949, I think it was, but I'm not sure. John Cobb has gone 400 and some miles an hour up there on the Bonneville Salt Flats. Wally Parks, they decide, why don't we go up there big time and race on that salt up there? Well, 2 guys, Norm Lean and Doug Harrison, decide to go with their Model A Roadster with a V8 engine. And they're using my cam, and he says, we're gonna dress up the crew a little bit too. What are you gonna do? Well, I don't know, we'll think of something. So they come back with my t-shirt, my little emblem right there, Isky Cams. I said, where'd you get this made? Oh, we had them made in Hollywood. He gave me the address, and I went up there and said, hey, I wanna make more of these. I'll make it big though. And we sold half of them, and we gave away half of them. And then the next meet at Bonneville, the next year, we gave away 4 for each entry. So the t-shirts became a great advertising deal. They think I invented the t-shirt advertising idea. Someone might have done it before me, but they seem to think I might have. But I got the guys who gave me the idea. I mean, they thought of it. In later years, this was a funny thing that happened. We're bragging in our ad and everything, and then Pete Millar, who was a great help to me because he'd make cartoons for me. Oh yeah, here's one of those ads. See, Pete Millar would make up ads, would give me ideas for ads like this. See? Yeah, that was And he comes one day, he says, I want to make a new cartoon on you, and it's going to be that new movie that came out. I says, Godfather. Why don't you make it Camfather? We grabbed the term and it stuck. No one else was using it. I had some fun with my sons. I said, you quit putting those ads in, calling myself the Camfather, and now that new company that started up claims that they are the Camfather. What? What? They did? I said, no, they didn't. But they will if we don't keep it up. So I scared them that way. Been very fortunate to get in something that I like and was interested in and still interested in it. A lot of the development came from just trying things, you know, just mechanical things I'd like to curious about. I wonder if this will work. Wonder if we ought to try that. I always figured we might stumble onto something. If we just keep fooling around here, and we did, that's what we did, we stumbled onto something.